The Galactic Empire was one of the most vicious military powers that the galaxy had ever seen, well known for its callous but effective battlefield tactics. This was a far cry from what, for millennia, the Republic had been known for, which is to say, generally clean warfare to whatever degree possible. This change took place entirely over the course of the Clone Wars, an evolution fueled partially by the pressures of the times and partially by the tacticians that rose to prominence during the conflict.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Republic's battle tactics changed drastically over the course of the Clone Wars, and for good reason. The standard battle plans that came with the Grand Army of the Republic could only go so far, and evolution was absolutely necessary if the Republic stood any chance of winning the war. But it could be argued that this evolution went too far. Even without the influence of the Sith, Republic tactics had already begun going down an imperial path by the end of the time of the Outer Rim sieges, as tacticians constantly sought out ways to win the war faster and easier. The Republic military had a bit of a rocky history. Originally, the Republic went without a military at all, but this changed with the Chinese Wars of 24,000 BBY, which saw the creation of the Republic Army and the Republic Navy. Due to the extremely bloody nature of the end of the war, the Republic Army was greatly downsized and the Navy was disbanded altogether after the conclusion of the conflict, with its assets distributed among planetary armies. This changed drastically with the advent of the Pius Dia Crusades around 10,000 years later, when an extremist religious order took control of the Republic and rebuilt both the army and navy, using them in genocidal anti-alien crusades. The reign of the Pius Dia ended when the Navy rebelled and together with the Kamasi, Asakani, Jedi and Bureau of Ships and Services crushed the regime. For the next 10,000 years, the Republic Army was kept in good condition, and the Republic Navy became one of the Republic's most valued institutions, with many strong traditions forming over the millennia. However, after the 7th Battle of Ruusan and the end of the New Sith Wars, Supreme Chancellor Tarsus Valorum completely disbanded the entire Republic military. It was replaced with a system of planetary defense forces which took command of the former military's hardware and personnel. This system persisted through 1,000 years of peace right up until the start of the Clone Wars, resulting in the Republic having no tactical infrastructure to speak of. As a result, when designing the Grand Army of the Republic, the Kaminoans improvised. The Republic Army, in particular, was long gone, with no traditions or anything left for the Kaminoans to work off. And so, they designed their own standard ground tactics, with the extreme sort of precision that they applied to everything. Their tactics were simplistic, but they were easily applicable to almost any scenario, and they were effective enough for the start of the Clone Wars. At the start of the invasion, Acclamator-class assault ships would deploy waves of LA-AT gunships and LA-AT dropships, carrying a first wave of clone troopers, speeder bikes and ATTEs to the battlefield, where they would clear a landing zone. Some assault ships would then land and deploy the rest of their cargo, while other assault ships would coordinate gunships in deploying wave after wave directly to the front lines. On the battlefield, individual soldiers would split up into smaller units to achieve objectives. They would keep in constant contact with the higher-ups through a tactical net that the gunships and ATTEs linked back to the command centers. Speeders would provide recon and ATTEs would serve both as mobile command centers and rallying points for infantry, as well as heavy vehicles, obviously. Gunships would provide air support, while gunships and walkers alike would provide medical support and resupplies to troops in any given area. And the first waves as a whole would serve as a screen to protect SPHATs, which would advance in columns behind the front lines and annihilate anything strong enough to resist the initial waves. This battle plan is incredibly simplistic, but it did work well enough on Geonosis, Munilist, and other early battlefronts. Most importantly, it was specific specific enough to be fine without modification, and vague enough to make modification and improvement easy. While standard battle plans for ground forces changed drastically over the course of the war, this basic strategy remained the foundation of those tactics for essentially the whole conflict. Naval tactics, however, were a different story. The Kaminoans were fresh out of luck when it came to rebuilding the Republic Navy. They had enough experience with armies to build basic ground tactics, and Mandalorians to help them in that regard, but naval warfare was completely foreign to them and to their Mandalorian counterparts. As a result, early Republic naval tactics during the Clone Wars were embarrassingly rudimentary, and the starting standard tactics were all but completely discarded by the end of the war. The Kaminoan space tactics were limited to the use of assault ships and gunships, which already leaves much to be desired. They provided their warships with no starfighters, trusting their LAATs to do the trick, which they generally didn't due to the vastly superior maneuverability of vulture droids. Their assault ships were better equipped, but they were the only warships the Kaminoans provided, and they were nowhere near a match for some of the Confederacy's more specialized vessels. Kaminoan naval tactics could be summarized as assault ships shooting anything in range and gunships going in to deal with anything that the assault ships couldn't accurately hit. They were pathetically insufficient, and for that reason, the Jedi almost completely redid them almost immediately. Were it not for Adi Gallia and her Jedi pilots at Geonosis, the Republic fleet that had been sent to the planet may well have been crushed, especially since most of the assault ships landed instead of opting for the warship role. When the Jedi took command of the Grand Army of the Republic, things began to change almost immediately. Unfortunately, the improvement wasn't as significant as could have been hoped for. The Jedi added nuance to standard ground tactics, but they didn't modify them all that much, as very few Jedi were actually capable generals. Most of their innovations consisted of new, unorthodox battle strategies to add to the standard model, with their most important contribution to the army being the militia model, a strategy in which a small force of clones would raise local militias to fight battles for themselves. And while the Jedi did improve on the Kaminoans' atrocious naval tactics, the improvement still wasn't nearly significant enough. As the Republic Navy still only had one model of warship, the Jedi tried to bandage up Republic naval tactics by simply fixing the starfighter issue. The Jedi essentially donated their entire starfighter corps to the military, lending them to clone pilots or flying them personally to fill much needed interceptor roles during early battles. This was a major improvement, as shown by the first Battle of Kamino, but it still wasn't nearly enough. A few months into the war, however, more changes began to take place. For a while the Republic military had ceased to exist for nearly 1,000 years by that point, the planetary security forces and the judicial forces were alive and well, and they provided desperately needed tactical knowledge to the military. In conjunction with some of the more experienced Jedi generals and some skilled clone officers, especially ARC troopers, Republic tacticians helped streamline ground tactics, making them much more efficient and adaptable. A wider array of equipment and vehicles was factored in, as were new classes of clone troopers that were intended to fill much needed roles. In particular, these tacticians worked wonders for the Navy. Through the Anaxis War College, most of the old Republic Navy's traditions were ported over to the new Navy, with minor updates to account for changes in the times. As part of this, Republic naval tactics were almost entirely rewritten, replaced with old tactics that had seen use thousands of years before, though they were updated to account for new ship models, starfighter types, and other factors. While the Clone Wars era Republic Navy never really lived up to the Republic Navy of old, it laid the groundwork for the Imperial Navy, which quickly surpassed it. By this point, the Republic military was in good shape. A streamlined, more imaginative version of the original Kaminoan ground tactics worked more or less perfectly for the Grand Army, while old naval tactics updated for new ship models worked similarly well for the Navy. But the evolution of Republic tactics didn't stop here. The Republic wanted to win more easily, more often, and faster, and certain voices among the Republic tacticians, most notably Tarkin and Ahmed Issad, called for cooler and more efficient battle plans. Their influence over the military was clearly evident by the start of the Outer Rim sieges, and it only became more evident from there. Republic ground tactics became less oriented toward helping native populations fight off the Confederacy for themselves to using native populations to fight off the Confederacy for the Republic. As heavier ground weapons were designed, they were more frequently used indiscriminately, often incurring large-scale civilian casualties. Reconquered planets were treated more harshly than they had been in the past, and domination became emphasized over liberation. Most disturbingly, neither Jedi nor clone seemed to care. More barbaric tactics were even more evident in the Navy, where the Jedi now had little to no say. Revan-esque moral shortcuts were frequently employed by naval commanders who became accustomed to making sacrifices to gain greater victories. Orbital bombardment was employed much more frequently, especially after General Grievous slagged Tombarine during Operation Dirge's Lance. Naval commanders gradually became as ruthless as they would be during the reign of the Empire, and it's very hard to draw a clear line between where Republic naval tactics ended and Imperial ones began. What started off as a necessary development of tactical complexity ultimately became the foundation of Imperial military brutality, and the worst part was that it was entirely natural. There wasn't much Sith manipulation involved. The Sith may have improved, but Tarkin and his followers were acting of their own accord. Whether this was just a natural evolution of tactics as was necessary to win a conflict as brutal as the Clone Wars, or just a deviation fueled by wartime anger is ultimately yours to decide. So that's our account of the Republic's evolving Clone Wars era tactics, but what do you think? Do you consider the late stage evolution of Republic tactics to be justified? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, make sure you check out all those juicy links in the description below, where you can check out the wider Geetsly's community on Discord, where you can chat with other Star Wars fans, and on our Gmod and Roblox servers, where you can game Star Wars with other Star Wars fans. And if you are into history, make sure you check out my second channel for quality uploads every single week. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.